How's it going, everybody? This is a Dual Threat Podcast, your daily news source for all things sports. I'm one of your hosts, Jacob.
I'm the other one, Drew. How's it going? Make sure to hit that like, sub button, and comment any differing opinions. Today, we're going to be doing our second segment of how teams can make the playoffs. If you haven't already checked it out, the first one we talked about Texas A&M and how they can make a run for the playoffs for the first time since the playoffs have been put into college football. And so today we're going to cover Notre Dame. First, the biggest game for Notre Dame is going to be this weekend. That's really going to determine their percentage-wise of how they can make the playoffs. They play Clemson this week without Trevor Lawrence. What do you think about that game?
Yeah, Clemson last week. We talked about it in the last couple college football videos. Their defense didn't look great. It felt like Boston College, which it seems weird to say, but it felt like Boston College was the best offense they've played so far this season. And I mean, Boston College is 4-2. So we can't just write. I'm sorry, 4-3. We can't just write them off as a terrible team. But they're 3-3 in ACC play, which is obviously not great. And yeah, it was weird that Clemson got behind early. And they had to make a pretty substantial comeback, which they obviously ended up doing. Yeah, so it really all starts this weekend. If they can get out front early, and I feel like it's a pretty common knowledge that Notre Dame's defense is significantly better than Boston College's. And so if they could get as big of a lead as Boston College did, I think they have a much better chance of holding on to it than Boston College did.
Well, if you look at it with Boston College, here's what I think the difference is between Boston College and Notre Dame. And we talk about this a lot. Ian Book is not that great of a quarterback. I mean, he only has, 7 passing touchdowns this year. If you look at Notre Dame, they're really good on the ground. They average, I think, 250 rushing yards per game. And that's what Clemson's really good at stopping. You look at their defense, they're ranked 15th in the country for the least amount of rushing yards per game at just 99.9, I believe. Yeah. And that, I mean, you look at Notre Dame with the 250, that's really how they put points up on the board. And I think that's where they're really going to struggle this weekend. Notre Dame's rushing defense is also good, but thankfully Clemson's offense is really towards passing more than anything. So I think Clemson does end up winning this game. And that's going to put a problem for Notre Dame to get to the playoffs. So how do you think they can, or do you think that they can still make the playoffs even if they lose to Clemson?
Yeah, so last night ESPN had their little way too early playoff predictor show thing, and they actually discussed this game. So currently they have Clemson with a 72% chance to make the playoff. I feel like everybody was expecting that. Notre Dame with a 25%. I mean, that's currently. If Clemson wins this game, they shoot up to 84, and Notre Dame drops to 13%. So there's still a chance. And it obviously is going to come down to the ACC championship, right? Assuming
Yes.
That these two teams meet again, which they more than likely will. It's really probably going to come down to that game. I think this says if Notre Dame wins, it's pretty much 50-50 that they make the playoff. And I think it's really going to come down to if Notre Dame can get this win and they go to the ACC championship, say they go and lose, right? So they beat Clemson this week without Trevor Lawrence, okay? They go to the ACC championship, undefeated, Clemson being one loss with their only loss to Notre Dame. And Trevor Lawrence comes out, and they lose a close one. Notre Dame keeps it close, but they end up losing. Do you think they both get in? I mean, this says Notre Dame, if they win this week, they have a 47% chance to make the playoff. I don't know exactly if that's taking into account them losing the ACC championship.
Does it say Clemson's percentage?
48%. So
they're both.
It feels like if Notre Dame wins this game, there's a pretty decent chance that they both get in.
Well, right, and I mean, if you look at Notre Dame's schedule, they actually don't have an easy schedule for the rest of the year. We'll talk that in a little bit, like Boston College, North Carolina at North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't been so hot the past few weeks, but they're actually a pretty decent team. But with Notre Dame winning this weekend, My thing is, if Notre Dame's gonna beat them, it's gonna have to be this weekend. I don't think they're gonna beat them with Trevor Lawrence unless there's more COVID complications before then or whatever. So my thing is Notre Dame has to win this weekend, and if they do, I don't know if you can put them in if they end up losing in the ACC championship. Maybe if it's a close one, just because it shows that they actually can stick with them with their best.
Right.
But if you beat them with a backup and then lose with their starter, it kind of seems like one of the teams is better than the other.
Sure.
And I think that really comes down to other conferences. I mean, if A&M that we talked about earlier goes 9-1, do you put a 9-1 A&M over a 9-1 Notre Dame?
Do you put a 7-0 Pac-12 Oregon in?
Right.
Like yeah, I agree. There are a lot of things that they need to go right. Which it really all starts with winning this football game. Taking advantage of the backup quarterback, allowing Ian Book to work. Like you talked earlier, his stats are not great this season. 1,200 passing yards, 7 touchdowns. But I do think a big thing there is he only has 1 pick on the season. And so he's protecting the football. He's letting the ground game just go crazy on teams. He has 212 rushing yards himself with 5 touchdowns. And I think that's going to be their game plan. Get out to an early lead and just kind of try to run the clock with that pretty elite ground game that they have.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Boston College, the way they were able to kind of shock Clemson last weekend. It was in the air. I mean, they only had 50 rushing yards. They just got absolutely dominated on the ground. But if you look at their passing game, and they actually forced Clemson with a turnover as well, and Notre Dame's going to have to do that this weekend. But their passing game is what's really Clemson's weakness on defense, it seems like, this season. And that's kind of Notre Dame's weakness on offense. So that's going to be an interesting thing to see this weekend. I think Ian Book is really going to have to step up if he's going to beat Clemson and this backup quarterback this weekend. Also, I mean, I think it's pretty much a lock if Notre Dame wins and Cincinnati ends up losing, A&M ends up losing, and nobody in the Pac-12 is undefeated. I think then it's pretty much a lock that 2 ACC teams are getting in because you look at the SEC. I mean, Florida and Georgia play this weekend, which we'll talk about later this week. That's going to take away a 1-1 loss SEC team, and then the championship, most likely Alabama is going to win. That gets rid of another one.
Right.
So really, A&M is the only 1-loss SEC team available. And if you look at the Pac-12, do you put them in if they're 7-0? I mean, it's really small sample size.
Against bad teams, don't
right.
forget that.
And then, I mean, you look at Big Ten as well, and do you put in Wisconsin if they have 5 wins? If they're 4-1, if they lose to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship and they have to end up sitting out for these next 2 weeks, which they confirmed. It's just really hard. I think for Notre Dame to get in, I think they have to win this weekend.
100%.
That is a huge game. If they end up beating Clemson in the ACC championship, I believe they absolutely deserve a spot.
100%.
Because it really doesn't look like, since North Carolina has been losing the past few weeks, maybe Miami can challenge Notre Dame for the ACC championship spot. I mean, Miami only has that loss to Clemson, so it's possible. But I'm not really sure what Miami's schedule looks like for the rest of the year. Hang on, let me look at it.
It's not great. NC State.
They play NC State this weekend, which is a huge game.
Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, UNC last game of the year, but that game's at home.
So I don't know. I mean, it really depends. I think Notre Dame needs to take advantage of the backup quarterback this weekend
for sure
and beat number 1 ranked Clemson.
So what do you think about not Ohio State. Notre Dame wins this football game. They lose the ACC championship. Bama. So you put Notre Dame at 4. So is Bama 1 at that point? I mean, we both think Bama should be 1.
Yes.
I guess Clemson losing this game pretty much solidifies that they would be at 1.
Yes.
So you would have Clemson, Ohio State for the second year in a row in the first round, and then Bama, Notre Dame.
Well, it depends this weekend. If Georgia beats Florida, I feel like you could maybe put them in the top 4 again. I just don't know. It's kind of hard. I mean, I think if Georgia comes out and really shows that their offense has improved from the past few weeks, I think you have a case to put them in the top 4, especially if Clemson loses. But I really think Clemson's going to beat Notre Dame. They're going to drop. And then I guess Georgia goes in the top 4 if they win this weekend.
Yeah.
And if they lose, I guess you put Cincinnati or maybe A&M jumps them. It's just depends on how badly they beat the bad teams that they play this weekend.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we touched on it earlier a little bit. Going on to the rest of Notre Dame's schedule, it all starts with this Clemson win next week at Boston College. This might be watching Boston College play Clemson. It felt like they exposed Clemson's defense more than we had seen any other team, and they're not particularly good on the ground. They're actually pretty bad. If you look at their stats, they have like 600 total rushing yards, and Notre Dame has a 600-yard rusher, just one guy, on their own. But I think being at Boston College is a bit of a more difficult game. I still think they'll come away with that. At UNC has not looked good recently. They look good at the beginning of the year, so there's always that game could be up in the air. But I think Notre Dame's good enough to beat them as well. And then Syracuse and Wake Forest to finish off the year should be pretty easy wins for them. So yeah, I mean, it looks like for the rest of the season, it's really just that Clemson game and then the ACC championship.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Boston College game. I think a lot of people are going to see they played Clemson close, so they might play Notre Dame close. But the difference is Clemson's passing defense is not that great. I mean, they average almost giving up like 200 yards per game, which is actually pretty good. But you look at Notre Dame's, and they average like 150 passing yards per game on defense. And I mean, yes, Boston College did get that kind of lucky fumble, scoop, and score on the goal line. And so if Boston College is going to beat Notre Dame, they're going to have to force turnovers like they did against Clemson. They're going to have to stop them in the air, which luckily is a good thing against Notre Dame because they're not very good at that. I think really with that game, it's just going to be, Boston College is at home, so that's good. But I think Notre Dame ends up winning that game on the ground.
Yeah, I agree. And they're, like you said, their pass defense has been pretty solid this year.
Oh yeah, carrying Notre Dame for sure.
Absolutely.
Right now.
And so yeah, I mean, going back to that Clemson game just a little bit, I think a big thing you touched on it earlier briefly. I think a big thing for them is going to be getting DJ Uiagalelei. I still can't figure it out. But getting him to turn the ball over because
he did seem to overthrow a lot of easy passes against Boston College, and I think a lot of people haven't really talked about that. Yes, he performed solid as a true freshman, but as the #1 team in the country, you need to make those kind of passes.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a backup quarterback. It's hard to put blame on him. I don't think by any means he was the reason why that game was close. I think Clemson's defense really messed up a lot. I mean, you could blame the quarterback for that handoff for the scoop and score, but also you got to be able to get that ball. I mean, you're one of the best running backs in the country.
Right.
You got to be able to, put it in your pocket and run.
Yeah, I think he just had his eyes on the goal line. But I mean, looking at DJ last week, like you said, overthrew a lot of balls. And I think, as we have been talking about pretty much the whole time, Notre Dame's pass defense is a lot better than Boston College's.
Right.
So I think they're going to have a lot of safety help over the top, and it felt like he overthrew like 3 or 4 in a row. And I can't imagine that none of those are going to be interceptions like they were last week. And I think turning the ball over is going to be a big thing for Notre Dame for sure. And one thing that could help Clemson's case in this game is that DJ is going to have the whole week to prepare. This it felt like got thrown on really everybody when Trevor Lawrence got announced that he had COVID. And I think especially for him,
I think it was 2 days in advance, maybe on Thursday or something.
Yeah, him having to just kind of step up and fill in. and he did good for what he had to do. And I feel like he might have a little more time to get dialed in and just get more ready for that game. But I mean, anything can happen. Backup quarterback, you really don't know. I mean, look at headed over to the ACC really quick. Look at KJ Costello, right? He looked like a Heisman candidate in the first game against LSU, and then has been horrible since then. And so, if you're a Notre Dame fan, that's what you're hoping for this week, is that DJ filled in against a bad pass defense for Clemson last week, and that your defense is going to step up and just shut him down in this game for sure.
Yeah, so just to summarize, Notre Dame's going to have to force a lot of turnovers this weekend, and they're going to have to beat Clemson in the air.
Absolutely.
Because Clemson's running defense is not going to allow their running back to get the amount of yards that he's been getting this season. And so, just like to completely summarize what this video is about, Notre Dame needs to win this weekend if they want a big chance of making the playoffs. Even if they do lose the ACC, they still have that win against Clemson earlier in the season, so that would be on their resume. But even if they do lose against Clemson this weekend, it is possible for them to make the playoffs, but they need to win the championship.
Yeah, and
and of course that's going to be a lot harder. You're not going to be at home. They're going to have the starter.
Right. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean it really all comes through this game. I mean you just said it, right? Like this is when the backup's in, like this is the game you got to go out and win. At home in front of your home crowd. I don't know actually how their stands or how they're doing their stands with like fans or anything.
I think it's 25.
I mean, I would assume so. That feels like for the most part what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, in front of your home crowd, yeah, you got to come out with this win against Clemson this week for sure.
All right. Well, you got anything else to talk about?
I think that's good for me. So I just wanted to clear one thing up. Notre Dame loses this week. They win out. They go into the ACC championship and win. Where do you put them? Because of course they're in, right? Because Clemson.
Well, I think you put Alabama 1. I think that's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Depending on Ohio State, I mean, they would have to beat Wisconsin or whoever else they play in the Big Ten championship. I think you put them at number 2.
I think I agree with that.
And then I guess you put Notre Dame at 3.
And then Clemson at 4. Like who? Like I mean, Clemson.
I think it would be very hard for them to not put Clemson in. But like the scenario you said, where if Clemson wins this weekend and then loses in the championship, is that what you said?
Yeah, I mean they'd be undefeated going into the championship, and then lose to Notre Dame in neutral site.
Yeah.
So
I mean it would be hard. I feel like the playoff committee would hate to not put Clemson in.
Right.
But if you look at it, I mean, if they lose with their backup and then win with their starter, it's kind of hard to put them in because then it seems like Notre Dame is the better team if they're playing both healthy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess the playoff committee would probably put in Clemson. But
yeah, I think so too. Unless there's, I can't imagine a world where a 7-0 Pac-12 team gets in over Clemson.
Right.
Like our discussion about A&M, like that's more reasonable. I feel like 6-0, like Oregon, just say they beat everybody by 50, win the Pac-12 championship by 50. Obviously an exaggeration, but I can't imagine them putting a team like that in over Clemson. Like, it's assuming the Pac-12 the ACC championship would be close, which of course it would. Clemson's not going to get blown out.
Right.
And so assuming that game's close,
Notre Dame is no LSU.
Right.
So
yeah,
it's definitely going to be a close game.
I can't imagine it's anything other than Bama, Ohio State, Notre Dame at 3, Clemson at 4 in that scenario. So.
No, yeah, I completely agree with you. I think the committee would definitely probably put in Clemson, even if they do end up losing that ACC championship. I mean, I think if you see Clemson lose this weekend and then win the ACC championship, they're absolutely getting in. Probably
there'll be 2.
Yeah,
I mean,
2 or
unless
3.
Unless Ohio State is just what everybody thinks they are.
Because I know the playoff committee's not going to punish them for not having Trevor Lawrence against the number 4 team in the country.
Absolutely not.
All right, well, I think that about summarizes the video. Thank y'all for tuning in, listening. Make sure to follow us on Twitter. We have a lot of updates there during games. Please subscribe. Please hit that like button. Comment any differing opinions that you have. Make sure to follow our TikTok just for a few clips. Also follow us on Spotify. That's really going to be we might even post just some Spotify episodes just on there and not on YouTube.
Yep.
So make sure to follow us there as well. And thank y'all for watching.
Absolutely.